There is a place on the prairies where magic happens. Where the people are born bleeding green, their identity, their pride, woven into the spirit of a football team. A team that has fought battles on and off a field of green for the past 100 years.
Ladies and gentlemen, your Saskatchewan Roughriders.
This is the story of the Saskatchewan Roughriders. The 100-year legacy of the Roughriders began in 1910.
Regina and Winnipeg and Calgary and Edmonton and Moose Jaw and Saskatoon were all vying to be the new, great, exciting center in Western Canada. And one of the ways that you could prove that you were more dynamic and you were more capable was to win on the sports field. It soon became apparent that this new sport called football should be played in Regina.
Amateur athletes from all over Regina were called to tryouts. For the Regina Rugby Club, it would be the first club to be run by a volunteer management team and solely owned by the community.
There's never been a shareholder for profit, ever. The people of Saskatchewan own the Saskatchewan Roughriders.
From the outset, fans attended practices and debated the team's chances. By the time the club played their first game in Moose Jaw, 150 enthusiastic Reginans tagged along.
You can ask anyone in the CFL about who has the best fans, and they're going to say the Roughriders.
The Saskatchewan Roughrider fans are the team.
The Regina Rugby Club lost 16-6. They would go on to lose every game they played that season, all 4 of them. In the autumn of 1912, the Regina Rugby Club traveled to Winnipeg to play for the Western Canadian Rugby Union's top prize, the Hugo Ross Trophy. Regina won their first Western Championship that year. When the team arrived back home, they were mobbed by a crowd of 3,000. Regina went football mad.
Everywhere you went about town, people were talking football. They were talking it on the streets. They were talking it in the theaters. In fact, on Sunday morning, it was talked about in one church by the minister himself.
The passion and enthusiasm of Rider Nation was born.
They cheered you when you needed it. When it rained, they were out there. Snowstorms, they were there. And they yelled.
From that moment on, the Regina Rugby Club won every game they played for the next 7 years.
They were, until 1935, the most dominant team in Western Canada.
A crown jewel of this golden age was star quarterback Neil Joseph Piffles Taylor, who returned home from the Great War in 1919.
He was a pilot. He got shot down. He lost an eye. When he came back, he was quarterback for the Regina Roughriders. And in one game, he lost his glass eye. And they had to stop the game until they found it.
In Taylor's first year as quarterback, the team outscored their opposition 205-8. The young team seemed unstoppable.
Regina was dominant. It really was dominant.
Taylor would soon become one of the most important figures in the development of Western football.
And of course, they named Taylor Field after him, quite rightly.
In 1923, team manager Alvin Horace Ritchie took his winning Regina Rugby Club to challenge for a national championship. This would be the first time that a Western team would compete for the coveted Grey Cup. Regina lost 54-0. A Toronto sports writer named Lou Marsh seemed to sum up the East's feelings on the matter.
Take it from me. There is no demand for a playoff between the East and the West, and there hardly will be until the West produces a team that stands out.
In 1926, the newly named Regina Roughriders were still champions of the West, but due to a lack of Eastern enthusiasm, they were not invited to challenge for the Grey Cup. By 1928, officials could no longer ignore the quality of Richie's team, and the Roughriders were invited to compete in Toronto. While they lost the game, it would be the first of an unprecedented 5 consecutive Grey Cup appearances.
They continually would get to the Grey Cup game, and they would continually get the snot beat out of them because the Eastern teams were just that much better.
Although outclassed, their toughness and determination on the field impressed even the most skeptical of Easterners. Lou Marsh takes back his earlier words.
Western experts said this was the best senior team the West had produced, but they didn't tell the half of it. This team is a real team.
By the late 30s, the Roughriders' domination of Western football was drawing to a close. Hard times lay ahead. The team's very survival was called into question as the country's economic devastation caught up with the club and attention turned to the Second World War. Many of the players left to fight abroad. The Roughriders were kept alive through the generosity of dedicated fans and volunteers.
The Rough Rider organization was built on volunteers, and these people are people that have normal 9-to-5 jobs. They would give up their 2 weeks of holiday to volunteer for the Rough Rider organization.
As soon as the war ended, those people who had kept it alive during those war years organized quickly, and we were able to fill the team in 1945. All those players who had gone to war, many of them came back to play for the black and red Regina Roughriders.
In previous decades, the team had worn many colors. In 1948, Rough Rider executive Jack Fife made a discovery while on a business trip to Chicago that would help define the team as we know it today.
And he noticed in an Army surplus store, a whole lot of uniforms were on sale, and they were green and white.
The Rough Riders donned the new jerseys and became the green and white. That same year, the team was renamed the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Fans from the furthest reaches of the province quickly took the team into their hearts.
I can be in Prince Albert or down in Estevan or Weyburn, and people walk up and they want to talk Rough Rider football.
In the early 50s, many Canadian football clubs began to invest in American talent. Unlike other major league teams, new players would be offered steady off-season employment and a special place in a community that loved its team.
People in Canada had a heart, an open heart. No matter what color, what race, no matter where you was from, those people were able to open up to you and make you feel like you was at home.
This is the place you have the best chance to have a career, because it's been a tradition here to have players who have been successful on and off the field at the same time.
In 1951, the Rough Riders attracted the attention of a superstar, Heisman Trophy nominee, All-American Glenn Dobbs.
Glenn Dobbs was a personality bigger than life. He was very good looking, he was tall, 6'4", and people fell in love with him.
You know, there was a very serious movement at one time to rename Regina D'Auberville. That's the kind of hold that he had on it.
On November 10th, 1951, spurred on by Dobbs, Saskatchewan defeated Edmonton in the Western Final. The Rough Riders were headed to the Grey Cup for the first time since 1934, this time with a real shot at the title. Jubilant fans tore the goalposts off the ground and carried them through the streets.
That was something else. The fans. There we go, back to the fans again. They're always with us, all the time.
At the Grey Cup in Toronto, the Rough Riders were again outmatched by an Eastern team. The Ottawa Rough Riders beat Saskatchewan 21-14, but Dobbs had brought the team as close as they'd ever come. The enthusiasm that Dobbs created continued for years. Then, suddenly, at the end of the 56 season, disaster struck. 4 of Saskatchewan's top players were in Vancouver for the 1956 CFL All-Star Game.
And they were coming back when the plane hit Mount Celeste. Very, very troubling times in Saskatchewan.
The club retired the numbers for those 4 players, and that's quite appropriate because it was a huge loss.
The team didn't play well the next year. The memory was there, and the heartbreak never left. We had 2 or 3 so-so seasons.
We didn't recover from that for a long, long time.
The team failed to make the playoffs for the next 4 years. The loyalty and faith of the Saskatchewan fans would once again have to carry the team through this difficult time of rebuilding. Few would have guessed how the years of devotion were about to finally pay off. After the disaster of 1956, the Roughriders and a province of fans were kept going by the distant memory of the days of Rider glory.
That plane crash would have caused the team to be weak for a few years into the years that I played. They had a pretty poor team in the late 50s, and until 61, we started having a better team.
In 1963, the team traveled to Calgary for the first of a 2-game Western semifinal with the Calgary Stampeders. They lost the first game 35-9, meaning that 2 days later they'd head into the second game 26 points behind. It seemed clear that yet another next year had already dawned. But 2 significant factors would come into play that night. Earlier that year, the Roughriders had acquired a 25-year-old quarterback from Ottawa named Ron Lancaster. Lancaster's understanding of the game was unparalleled.
Ronnie, I mean, just live, breathe football, was absolutely amazing. He could conjure up things in a game that I don't think anybody else has the ability to.
And he was a competitor. He wanted to win.
With their season hanging in the balance, the coaching staff behind Lancaster began to take an unconventional approach to the plays they'd use that night.
Well, the day before the game, Bob Shaw, the head coach, was at home with his wife, Mary, sitting at the kitchen table, and all of a sudden he started drawing a play on a napkin. It was called a sleeper play.
It was a play in which one of the players wouldn't be in the huddle. He would wander over to the sidelines as if he was going off the field. He wasn't part of the play, and nobody on the field paid any attention to him.
With these 2 weapons in their arsenal, the Roughriders headed into Game 2 of the Western semifinal, 26 points behind.
We come back to Regina and start the second game, and we've got nothing to lose.
On Saskatchewan's first possession of the game, Coach Shaw called for Ronnie and receiver Ray Purdon to use the sleeper play.
So they snapped the ball, and by the time the Stampeders realized what happened, Purdon was already running down the field.
And boom, he's gone.
And the Calgary defenders had twigged onto it, but too late, and he was in the clear, and he went 70 or 80 yards for a touchdown. So all of a sudden, it was a 19-point game.
When that happened, everybody just seemed to loosen up, and we started playing football.
Led by the man who would soon be dubbed the Little General, the Roughriders began to mount one of the finest offensive displays anyone had ever seen.
You're always in a game when Ronnie's at the quarterback. You always had a chance, an opportunity to win.
The Roughriders won 39-12. It was enough to give them the series by a single point. The game would be remembered fondly as the Little Miracle.
That was an amazing football game.
What that did to the team, to the town, was incredible.
The point was, we'd never given up. We had learned how to win, and I think that carried through with a lot of our players over the next few years.
The 63 season would end shortly thereafter with a loss in the Western Final. But fans would warm themselves throughout the winter with the memory of the Little Miracle at Taylor Field. The early 60s saw the rise of a number of Rough Rider legends, including running back George Reed, who arrived in Regina in 1963.
They just had the highway there, and they had a stop sign out there. Really not a lot of signage to see, so I just went around the ring road out going east, and I needed gas. I stopped in Balgonia and asked the guy how much further I have to go to Regina, and he said, well, you got to turn around and go back about 11 miles, and you'll be in the city of Regina. When I walked into the Rider dressing room and saw 3 light bulbs hanging down from the ceiling and a couple pot-belly stoves, I was wondering what the hell I got myself into.
Weighing little more than 200 pounds, few thought George would last long as a fullback. But his thighs measured 29 inches around, and he would break the arms of defensive players that tried to arm tackle him.
I'm not sure I've ever seen a tougher athlete in my life than George Reed.
Like Glenn Dobbs had done over a decade earlier, George Reed and Ron Lancaster came to personify the bond between team and community.
George Reed lived just around the corner. Ron Lancaster lived 3 blocks away, and we'd ride over and wave at him once in a while when he's out cutting the lawn.
Ronnie, for example, he devoted a lot to helping out high schools and so forth, and he was one of the guys that was a ringleader of us going to different little towns and playing basketball, helping them raise money. That's the big part about this football team, is the way in which they go to communities and they care about them, and then they are repaid by sellout crowds.
Despite an explosive rebirth of enthusiasm, both on and off the field, the Rough Riders' 55-year-old championship drought continued to haunt the team and its fans. 1965 saw the arrival of a new head coach, Eagle Keys, along with a number of other Rough Rider players, including a 23-year-old wide-eyed Regina boy named Alan Ford.
So you walk in the locker room your first day of trying out, and there's Ron Lancaster sitting over there in one locker, and there's George Reed down at the other end. So for me, it's kind of been a lifelong dream to be part of this organization that I grew up as a kid worshiping.
After defeating the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in the 1966 Western Final, the Rough Riders were headed back to the Grey Cup for the first time since 1951. Their opponents would be the dominant Ottawa Rough Riders. Across the country, few gave Saskatchewan much of a chance.
CBC had set up their cameras before the game in the Ottawa dressing room. The champagne was there, the trophy was there.
Everybody pretty much predicted that Ottawa was going to run away with it, and I think we liked being the underdogs.
Saskatchewan would score their first points of the game on the back of a thrilling Dale West interception.
Jackson tried to throw a ball to Margina Atkins. I caught the ball and took it back to the 7-yard line. We got a touchdown the next play.
In the second quarter, Al Ford secured yet another Saskatchewan touchdown. At halftime, the game was tied. Early in the fourth quarter, Lancaster hit Hugh Campbell in the end zone to put that green and white out in front. The score was 21-14. Saskatchewan fans across the country held their breath.
We were 7 or 8 points in the lead, but that's not a guarantee. A lot of us had the feeling that the universe was somehow ordained that we wouldn't ever win the Grey Cup, that something would come along.
With just a few minutes left in the game, at Ottawa's 31-yard line, Ron Lancaster took the snap and looked to Reed.
Ronnie handed him the ball. George hit the hole fast, and his legs were just pumping.
When I said, we're going to win this, I knew.
As the clock ran down on that overcast day in Vancouver, the Saskatchewan Roughriders became Grey Cup champions for the first time. Fans mobbed the field.
The big joke in the locker room is we had to put beer in the cup because all the champagne was over in Ottawa's locker room, but we were Rough Riders and we liked beer better than champagne anyhow, so it didn't matter.
You really didn't realize that until after you got off the field and started thinking about this, hey, we're champions, Grey Cup champions, It was really something, you know.
Back home, a proud province went wild.
And this city went nuts, like absolutely nuts.
Suddenly, everybody streams out onto the streets, and people are hugging complete strangers, and it just bedlam.
Over the next 10 seasons, the people of Saskatchewan would be the proud owners of the most powerful team in Canadian football.
There's no team in the NFL that won as many games as we did in that decade. And certainly nobody in Canada won as many games. We were the dominant team.
Swollen with pride, Saskatchewan and their football team were bolstered by a future filled with possibilities. They would need every bit of that strength in order to survive what the coming years would bring.
Lancaster hands it off to George Reed. He's got a hole. Reed still on his feet. Oh my, Reed!
In the wake of their first 1966 Grey Cup victory, the Roughriders seemed unstoppable. After posting a record of 12-4, the team was on its way back to the Grey Cup. The 67 Grey Cup was held in Ottawa. The Roughriders were playing the Hamilton Tiger Cats, known that year as the Beasts from the East. Early in the game, the Little General took his team on the offensive.
First down, Riders.
Lancaster sent a running back named Eddie Buchanan down the middle. They felt it was a play that would work, that the Buchanan would get open right off the bat. And he did. Ronnie dropped back into the pocket, had lots of time to throw it. Buchanan went over the middle, running clear. There's nobody near him. Lancaster threw a perfect pass right into Buchanan's hands.
Bounces right off Eddie's hand.
Eddie Buchanan! Oh,
You could hear this whole province just thud because the game turned on that one play.
Saskatchewan lost the game 24-1.
They don't forget stuff like that here.
From 1967 to 1976, the Roughriders were outstanding in the regular season, but disappointing in the playoffs.
I mean, they were great until they got to Grey Cups. People have referred to the Roughriders of that era as a dynasty, and it might be the only dynasty ever that won only one championship.
In 1971, their Grey Cup winning coach, Eagle Keys, was hired away by the BC Lions, and the Roughriders began to see some of their older players retire. When the 1976 season began, the team went to training camp without George Reed, and with the knowledge that the next few seasons would be Ron Lancaster's last. The 1976 Grey Cup game against Ottawa marked the end of the dynasty. A miraculous late-game catch by Tony Gabriel summarized all the pain and frustration of having come so close so many times.
It was devastating to see him catch that touchdown, knew that we'd lost the Grey Cup game.
After a while, you started to wonder if somebody was looking unfavorably upon the Roughriders because so many things, so many misfortunes had befallen them. 1980s came to be known as the reign of error. They went 11 years without making the playoffs.
Don Matthews, when he coached here, said that he would be embarrassed after a loss to go out and buy groceries because he'd be standing there looking at the cantaloupes and some woman would come over. He said, and a 70-year-old woman say, "Why did you gamble on that play? Why didn't you just kick it away?"
So you have to battle that and sort of the disappointment you see everywhere that you go. When you're not successful here, you see that disappointment in the faces of all the fans.
Rider pride is, I think, deep down accepting that things aren't always going to go your way as a fan. It's not a joyride. There are going to be some days when you wonder, why did I ever cheer for this football team?
There were many theories as to why the Roughriders were no longer a winning team. Lack of focus, commitment, fight. Had the hard-learned lessons of the past been forgotten?
In 76, we spent so much time on the field and so much time off the field together. And suddenly that wasn't happening. I seriously believe that some of the people that they brought in didn't want to be here.
They had so many years, 11 years of not being in the playoffs, and all of a sudden you come here. To be honest with you, I thought it was the blackest day of my career.
In 1987, President Tom Shepard, with a losing team and pressing financial difficulties on his hands, appointed former player Bill Baker to the position of general manager.
We had to go out and restart the Roughriders, regain the respect of the community, as well as convince them we were going to build a football organization that deserved their support.
Baker shook things up. He traded the Roughriders quarterback of 3 years for a 23-year-old rookie quarterback, Tom Burgess. Baker then moved to acquire a second field general in a man named Kent Austin.
What likens both Lancaster and Austin, or Lancaster and Burgess, is they all had the ability to make people play better that were around them.
But in '87, the building of a solid on-field product would be the least of Shepard and Baker's worries.
We were into a major worldwide recession. Interest rates were 18%. The fan base had shrunk across the league. The economy was shrunk. The CFL was in great trouble. Montreal had folded. Ottawa was in a death struggle and ended up folding. There wasn't any franchise in the league that wasn't really struggling. Boy, I mean, the death watch was on.
At the outset of 1987, Bill Baker told the media that the Saskatchewan Roughriders could fold by July, a sobering prospect for Rider fans. In order to keep playing football in Saskatchewan, many players took pay cuts of up to 30%.
Not very often in pro sports does the owner say there's absolutely no negotiations involved here. You have to play for this amount of money, or you're gonna have to play somewhere else.
It was a difficult time in their history. It was, always negative. It was like we're on the edge of collapse here.
In their darkest hour, the Saskatchewan Roughriders turned once again to their fans. It was announced that a last-ditch attempt, a 16-hour ticket-thon, would be held in an effort to save the team.
And you think at that point that your team is dead and you're throwing your milk money in a jar trying to keep the Roughriders afloat. But you do that because that's somewhere embedded in your psyche as a Rough Rider fan that I've got to do my part to keep this team alive.
By June 14th, the number of tickets sold reached over 77,000. It would be just enough to keep the franchise alive.
We've done everything from selling the old Taylor Field turf to having bingos, to having lotteries, to having ticket-a-thons, to you name it, we've done it to stay afloat.
It just shows an example of what the people of Saskatchewan are like when they got their backs against the wall, that they come out fighting.
Although they posted another miserable record that year, the Roughriders would live to see another season. In 1989, under the leadership of Burgess and Austin, Saskatchewan excelled in the regular season. By late September, although riddled with injuries, it looked like they just might have a shot at making the playoffs. Sometimes there is one play in a single game that can define the future for a team. On September 30th, the Roughriders seemed poised for another victory. They were leading the BC Lions by 4 points with 5 seconds left on the clock. BC quarterback Matt Dunnigan found himself on Saskatchewan's 53-yard line with 1 play left. In desperation, he sent a Hail Mary pass downfield to his wideout. Roughrider safety Glenn Suter was ready for it.
So I see him waiting for the football to come down, and for a split second, I lost my focus. And I hit him as hard as I could. It was way early. It was a blatant foul.
I don't know what the hell he was thinking. He had a short circuit. We all short circuit at times. I mean, what can you say?
The Lions were awarded a penalty.
It was at that moment when I was in the huddle in our own end zone and the Lions had the ball on the 1-yard line. And I went, oh my God, what have I done?
He scores! BC touchdown!
Coach Gregory said it was the toughest loss ever, no question.
I couldn't even look my teammates in the eye.
People are calling in, they want his head, they want him off the football team. He did exactly what he had to do, and he faced up to everything and said, yeah, I blew it.
When I watched the leaders in our team address it and how they talked about it and how they emphasized coming together and not pointing fingers at each other, I thought, this is what makes teams.
And what people don't realize, that play was kind of the turning point of the whole '89 season.
Shortly after, team members began to wear white tape on their ring fingers to symbolize a Grey Cup championship ring.
Through the season, more and more guys started to believe.
The Roughriders then won their next 2 games, and after a hard-fought end of the season, had secured their playoff spot. The galvanized Roughriders were now headed to Edmonton in the hopes of earning their first trip back to the Grey Cup since 1976. Waiting for them was the 12-point favorite Edmonton Eskimos.
I mean, we just went into a place in Edmonton where they were 16-2. They led every offensive category. They led every defensive category. They were a phenomenal football team.
The Eskimo players, led by their all-star quarterback Tracy Ham, did not think much of their beaten-up third-place opponents. In a bold statement, Edmonton Eskimo John Mandarich was quoted as saying, "There's no reason they shouldn't blow the Roughriders out of the water."
You know what it did? It made a focused team not angry, but it became personal.
In Edmonton that day, the Roughriders prepared to show the country what the people of Saskatchewan are made of. Overmatched and underrated, the Saskatchewan Roughriders were taunted by doubters as they headed into the 1989 Western Final.
If we're going to go down, we're going to go down swinging. And that's what we did. We went after them.
Determined to stop Edmonton's offensive juggernaut, Saskatchewan's defense went after Ham with everything they had. The assault was led by none other than Glenn Suter.
He was all-world in that West Final against the Eskimos. Tracy Ham's back was covered with Glenn Suter numbers all over it.
And I think I blitzed something that I had done probably once a game in the regular season. I blitzed 20 times in that game. I've never been in a game before or since then that I saw another team start to unravel like they did.
I think to this day, 20 years later, Tracy Ham still doesn't know where Glenn Suter was coming from.
The Roughriders won the game 32-21.
And by the way, we kicked their ass. We just didn't beat Edmonton. We kicked their ass.
I can recall being in the locker room afterward and sort of that realization says we're going to the Grey Cup, and that's what you dream about. That's why you play.
It was already decided in my mind that the Grey Cup, we were winning it no matter what.
In a rematch of the 1967 Grey Cup, the Roughriders would play the Hamilton Tiger Cats. Masses of green and white Roughrider fans filled the newly built Skydome in Toronto.
That's the backing we have. No matter where we play, our fans usually outnumber anybody else's.
You kept hearing about the great fans in Saskatchewan. Well, they were there. So it was pretty cool. The place was packed and it was loud as hell.
Austin was given the start against Hamilton's Mike Kerrigan, and both quarterbacks were in fine form.
Those two quarterbacks went out there and stood toe-to-toe like two heavyweight fighters. For every good ball Kent threw, Kerrigan threw a good ball, another score. For every good catch Narcisse and Elgard and Fairholm made, their guy made a good catch.
With just 44 seconds remaining on the clock, the Roughriders were ahead by 7 points. Mike Kerrigan looked to the end zone for receiver Tony Champion.
I looked at him and thought, it's the best catch I've ever seen. And then it was back to the clock, right? It was, oh my God, what a catch. And then how much time we got?
And then Ken Austin came and he said, look, guys, I'm going to throw it downfield. We're going to move it in field goal range, and we're going to kick a field goal, and we're going to get out of here.
You're looking at the clock. Do we have time? Are we in field goal range yet? We got one more play. We got a chance. I look at Dave.
There's a lot of noise going on in the stadium at that point in the game. All of a sudden, everybody's talking to me.
Understanding the importance of the moment and the pressure facing Dave Ridgway, Glenn Suter tries to lighten the mood.
I said, check out that girl, check out that lady over there behind the Hamilton bench in the white t-shirt.
At the very last second, he turned to me and he said, "Did you see the blonde behind the bench?"
And he kind of looked up. I don't even know if he saw her. I think he just looked up and laughed.
So hats off to him for taking that whole pressure cooker away from Dave for those few seconds to let him relax and think about something else. Next thing you know, time's blown in. You know, I remember the ball coming back and kicking.
Of course, a kick. Well, we all talk about the kick.
Time seemed to slow down.
And then you look up and I see the flight of the ball.
It's up. It's good.
I turned to Glenn and I said, "Oh my God, we did it."
Joy. You know, just like you were a little kid and you see, you know, you didn't seen it so many times, but now you were there.
It was the most emotional I think I've ever been in any professional realm of life I've ever been in.
Well, next year has arrived for the Saskatchewan Roughriders.
I want to dedicate this to the people of Saskatchewan because they've hung with us for an awful long time. And I'll tell you what, probably nobody other than the players deserves it as much.
23 years to the day from their first national victory, the Saskatchewan Roughriders were Grey Cup champions once again. When they arrived in Regina, the players were driven straight to Taylor Field.
It was the most unbelievable reception that I've ever seen or heard or be part of. There's 15,000 or 18,000 people sitting in its minus 39, wind blowing.
What I remember most was celebrating it afterwards with the Saskatchewan people.
Yes, there was Kent Austin, and yes, there was Dave Ridgway, and Bobby Jurison, and Don Narcisse, and Ray Algard, and Jeff Fairholm, and an array of top caliber football players. But who carried the Grey Cup that day? Bob Poley from Prairie River and Roger Aldag from Gull Lake.
Boy, oh boy, it was something. It was something.
For myself and some of the guys that are born and raised in this province, and to win a Grey Cup, it's really, really special.
A lot of dreams came true for a lot of guys.
You know, went from being the blackest day of my career, being traded here, to all of a sudden in 2 years winning a Grey Cup. To me, that's why you play the game, to be part of a championship team.
With the same spirit that had seen the people of Saskatchewan through the devastating 1980s, the Roughriders had fought their way to their second ever national championship. But terrible crisis and great victory still awaited them in the years ahead. As it had in 1966, the Rider faithful hoped that their '89 Grey Cup victory would mark the beginning of another great Saskatchewan dynasty. But throughout the 90s, little by little, the old family from '89 went their separate ways. Throughout the decade, poor on-field performance led to a severe drop in attendance, and by the end of the 1996 season, the team's oldest demon had returned once again.
They were $2.6 million in debt. And after that last game of the 1996 season, my angle was this the last game the Saskatchewan Roughriders have ever played?
And there was no bull about it. It was true. I'm the treasurer, and I know there was no way we could operate.
Fans were less sympathetic this time around. On March 11th of 1997, another ticket-thon was held. It wasn't enough.
Well, are we going to make it? And I said, no, we're not going to make it. We're going to be $700 or $800 or even $1 million short of our goal. And they said, what does it mean? Well, it means we'll be bankrupt and the Roughriders will be no more.
What would people talk about on a Monday morning if the Saskatchewan Roughriders weren't there?
After 2 long months with an uncertain future, the NFL finally came to the Roughriders' rescue with a last-minute deal.
That's how close it came, and that's the closest it ever came.
It seemed progressively harder for such a small market team to compete and survive. The 9 years that followed would be filled with scandal and see the team lose their cherished, long-standing connection with the community.
There were a lot of situations where things weren't going well. You know, it was tough. It was very tough.
They didn't quite have that same joy of jumping into the community the way the really successful franchises did here, and get the support of the people here.
The hard-earned lessons of the past century seemed all but forgotten. Rough Rider players no longer spent time in the community, and fans lost confidence in their team. It was time for a change. Partway through the 2006 season, Rough Rider president Jim Hobson hired new general manager Eric Tillman, who had a reputation for Grey Cup success.
Eric Tillman said, "We have to realize that this is not a right, it's a privilege to be a part, to represent the Saskatchewan Roughriders as a football team. And the teams that do that are the teams that have a chance to win."
Tillman then brought in a man with intimate knowledge of the green and white, former quarterback Kent Austin.
I still remember Kent telling me that we're going to change the attitude around this team, we'll change the attitude around this province. We're going to get over that hump, and we're going to do it as a team together.
The rejuvenated 2017 included quarterback Kerry Joseph, Jeremy O'Day, and veteran local boy Gene Mikowski.
I can still remember the first meeting that Coach Austin walked into. He said right from day one, we're going to win the Grey Cup this year, and if you don't believe it, then you can leave the room.
And he taught us about what you do off the field and how you treat others. It wasn't all just about football for him.
It's a real simple principle. Be the best person you can possibly be, and by proxy, you be the best football player you can be. It always translates to the football field.
The Rough Riders opened their season with a record 7-2. Fans were swept up in the enthusiasm that Austin instilled in his players.
We sold a lot more tickets in Edmonton than the Edmonton Eskimos had sold for their own game.
It's an amazing phenomenon when every other team in the league banks on a better gate when the Riders play.
On the field, the Rough Riders' regular season was good enough to earn them their first home playoff game in 19 years. After winning the next 2 games, Austin's rejuvenated Rough Rider team headed to Toronto to challenge the Winnipeg Blue Bombers for the Grey Cup. November 25th, 2007. 18 long years since the Rough Riders last tasted Grey Cup victory, the revitalized team and their fans returned to the Sky Dome.
It was a packed house, and it was just, just an electric atmosphere.
We had home field advantage when we weren't even at home.
And the 95th Grey Cup is underway.
In the first half of the game, Winnipeg was up by 7 when a Rough Riders interception and subsequent touchdown tied the game. Going into the last quarter, the Rough Riders held a hard-earned 2-point lead. Kerry Joseph delivered the ball downfield to slot back Andy Fantuz, bringing the score to 23-14.
Our defense was playing well, so we knew that all we had to do was give them the lead, and that was going to give us a chance to finish things off.
But the Blue Bombers and their quarterback, Ryan Dinwiddie, refused to lie down. 1 field goal and 2 safeties later, Winnipeg had come within 4 points of the lead. 3 minutes and 37 seconds remained on the clock.
Is Ryan Dinwiddie the new Tony Gabriel as they're moving the ball into Saskatchewan territory? And suddenly you're starting to think, is this game going to creep away from the Rough Riders? But then Ryan Dinwiddie spends too much time looking at a receiver over the middle. In steps James Johnson, intercepts the pass, his 3rd interception of the game. And that's it.
With 33 seconds left in the game, Saskatchewan held the ball and the lead. All that remained was to keep the ball out of Winnipeg's hands and let the clock run down.
Boy, I get goosebumps right now just talking about it. When you know you've won the game and they can't stop the clock, and you kneel down a couple times, and hey, we're Grey Cup champions. That's it.
The Roughriders won the game by a final score of 23-19. Using the values long ingrained in the team over their near 100-year history, Kent Austin steered the wayward Roughriders back home.
I mean, what can you say? That's what you play for your whole life.
It's a great feeling to see guys that have gone so long, like Gene Mikowski, to see that guy just be able to hold that trophy up and to know that he is a champion. It's no better moment.
It was just a magical year in so many respects. All the things that happened, all the adversity that we overcame. It's not that you won the championship that you remember as much as the journey it took to get there. That's what football's about. It's always about the journey.
As it was in 1912, when the team won their first Hugo Ross Trophy, thousands of supporters braved the cold weather to celebrate with their team.
10,000 people in the stadium, packed with snow, waiting on us to bring the Grey Cup out to the stands. And I never saw anything like it.
We only did it 2 times in the century before. And it's a great start to the 21st century.
Record-breaking gate receipts that year helped the Roughriders declare an unprecedented profit. The 2008 and 2009 seasons saw the team make serious runs at the national championship, and their ticket sales have remained at an all-time high. The days of wondering whether or not the small team from Saskatchewan would survive another year now seem forever in the past.
I remember thinking, this team will never die. This team will never go away. These people in this province will never let that happen.
I think it's just a part of our evolution to believing that we are an elite franchise, believing that we can win.
After 100 years, there's no football team in the country that draws as many crowds, that sells as much merchandise, or that has as expansive and loyal a fan base as the century-old Saskatchewan Roughriders.
It's our only professional sport in Saskatchewan, and it's like a must for us. It's part of our way of life here.
The province kind of identifies that as themselves. The economy in Saskatchewan is booming, and it's all tied in. Nobody can tell me any different.
Like Dorothy said, there's no place like home, and Roughriders is such a big part of our home.
With a population of around 1 million people scattered on a big territory, there's no logical reason why the Saskatchewan Roughriders have survived for 100 years. But logic goes out the window when you have the determination of the people.